Ladies and gentlemen, a woman who learns to sit with herself in silence becomes the most unpredictable force in the room, not because she intends to dominate, but because she no longer needs to. Silence in a noisy world is misunderstood. It is often mistaken for weakness. But there is a kind of silence that is not born of suppression, but of strength. The kind that doesn't beg to be understood because it already understands itself. This silence is not the absence of words. It is the presence of awareness. It's the stillness that comes after you stop trying to explain your worth. It's the peace that enters when you no longer react to every shift in another person's mood. It is the clarity that rises when your emotions are no longer dictated by what someone did or didn't. Most women are trained to overexpress, to over-explain, to always give context to their boundaries until they realize that silence itself is the boundary. When a woman turns inward, not out of fear but out of choice, she activates a deeper form of respect. People feel it. They may not be able to name it, but they sense it. And when you begin focusing on yourself, not in selfishness but in stillness, everything misplaced starts falling back into place. When a woman begins to truly focus on herself, something profound begins to shift. Not just inside her, but in the world around her. It is not merely about self-care routines or momentary retreats from others. It is a deep awakening, a quiet decision to stop pouring energy into places that no longer give back, to reclaim attention from everything external and redirect it inward. That shift, though subtle at first, transforms everything. It begins with a question. Where is my energy going? In a world that constantly demands a woman's attention, her nurturing, her care, her explanations, her compromise, it becomes easy to forget that energy is not limitless. Attention is currency, and the way you spend it determines the quality of your emotional life. The more you give away without intention, the less you have for yourself. But the moment a woman begins to observe rather than react, to choose herself rather than chase others, she starts to experience a different kind of power. A power that doesn't come from trying to control others, but from mastering her inner space. Neuroscience has long confirmed this truth. What you focus on grows. This is called the Hebbian principle. Neurons that fire together wire together. When your mind is always busy trying to fix people, explain yourself, predict outcomes, or worry about how you're perceived, it strengthens patterns of anxiety and over-responsibility. But when you begin to bring your attention back to yourself, your breath, your thoughts, your values, your stillness, you start rewiring your brain for clarity, peace, and purpose. Take the story of Mina, a woman in her late 50s who had spent most of her adult life adjusting herself around others. As a mother, a wife, and later as a caretaker for aging parents, she learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken. But after her children moved out and her caregiving roles ended, she was left with silence. At first, it was terrifying. The noise of other people's needs had been her compass for so long that she didn't know how to navigate without it. But slowly, she began to ask, what do I feel when no one is watching? What do I want when I'm not needed? She started small morning walks without her phone, journaling without editing herself, saying no without guilt. And as her attention returned to herself, something powerful emerged. She no longer felt pulled in 20 directions. Her conversations became more intentional. She no longer responded to emotional manipulation with explanations, just calm silence. And to her surprise, people began to treat her differently. Not because she demanded respect, but because she radiated it from within. Focusing on yourself is not abandonment of others. It is anchoring within yourself so you don't get lost in others. You begin to recognize your patterns, where you overextend, where you seek validation, where you betray your intuition to keep the peace. And each time you notice, you interrupt the automatic cycle. That moment of noticing is power. It's awareness becoming action. There is a sacred discipline in remembering yourself before you remember others. It requires asking before every yes, whether it's rooted in fear or integrity. It means pausing before reacting to ask, is this worth my energy? Does this reflect who I am becoming? It's not easy, especially for women who've been conditioned to associate worth with service, silence with weakness, and boundaries with rejection. But in truth, the opposite is real. The woman who focuses on herself is not selfish. She is self-aware, and self-awareness is the foundation of every healthy relationship. Without it, we end up performing roles instead of being present. We absorb moods, mirror dysfunctions, and confuse emotional over-availability with. But when we are centered within, we can discern between what belongs to us and what doesn't. We no longer take things personally. We stop rescuing people from lessons they are meant to learn. One of the most misunderstood aspects of this journey is the practice of silence. Not the silence of avoidance or passive aggression, but the silence of presence. A deliberate, grounded quiet that listens more than it speaks, that observes without rushing to intervene, that chooses stillness over unnecessary reaction. In this kind of silence, a woman becomes untouchable, not because she's withdrawn, but because she's anchored. There is something deeply powerful about a woman who does not rush to fill the silence. In an argument, she does not need to be louder to be heard. In relationships, she does not over-explain to earn space. Her calm becomes her clarity and her silence becomes her boundary. Silence offers something no amount of speaking can provide perspective. From a physiological standpoint, silence engages the parasympathetic nervous system responsible for rest, digestion, and deep insight. When we are reactive, we operate from the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, which narrows our thinking and clouds judgment. But silence restores our access to higher thinking, creativity, and emotional regulation. It gives us space to see things for what they are, not what we fear they might be. Jasmine, a mid-career professional in her 40s, discovered this the hard way. She was used to defending herself in every conversation, trying to be understood by people who had already made up their minds. Every time someone questioned her intentions or minimized her emotions, she would jump in with explanations, justifications, or arguments. It drained her until one day during a heated moment with her partner, she paused. She said nothing, not out of resignation, but out of awareness. She realized in that instant that her peace was not up for negotiation. The silence that followed was more powerful than any point she could have made. It unsettled him, not because she was trying to hurt him, but because for the first time she didn't make herself emotionally available for conflict. She remained present, steady, and calm. That moment changed the dynamic of their relationship, not overnight, but permanently. He began to listen. She began to feel hurt, not because he changed, but because she did. We often believe that we must speak more to be seen. But sometimes it is in speaking less that we become visible. Silence is not the absence of voice, it is the presence of strength. It communicates what words often cannot. That you are no longer afraid to be misunderstood. That you no longer fear disconnection because you are deeply connected within, that your worth is not tied to being agreeable, but to being authentic. There is a deep wisdom in knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. Not from fear, but from freedom. Not from suppression, but from sovereignty. When you no longer use words to seek control, you allow life to reveal its truths. People expose themselves in your silence. Their intentions surface, their values become visible. You no longer have to investigate or argue. You just observe. And from that place of inner stillness, you make clearer decisions. In relationships, this is especially powerful. When a woman focuses on herself and practices the discipline of silence, she begins to see dynamics that were once invisible to her. She notices how some people only connect through chaos, how others expect emotional labor without offering it in return, how some conversations are not exchanges but power struggles in disguise, and most importantly, she sees her part in it, not to blame, but to reclaim responsibility. Every moment of silence becomes a mirror, and what you see in that mirror is not always comfortable. You might notice patterns of over-explaining, chasing closure, or giving second chances out of loneliness. But in seeing them clearly, you stop being ruled by them. You begin to act rather than react. And that alone changes everything. This journey does not require you to isolate yourself, but it does ask you to stop abandoning yourself. It invites you to slow down long enough to ask, who am I without the noise? What do I value when I'm not performing? What emotions arise when I'm not distracted? Silence creates space for these questions. It reveals the internal architecture of your life, the values, beliefs, and wounds that shape your relationships. And once seen, they can be healed, rewritten, aligned. One of the most important realizations a woman can have is not everything requires your energy. Not every message needs a response. Not every misunderstanding needs clarification. Not every question deserves an answer. The moment you realize that your presence is enough, you begin to conserve your energy for what truly matters. This kind of self-focus is not a destination. It's a daily practice, a return again and again to the present moment, to the breath, to the truth that you don't have to chase what aligns with you. You attract it by being aligned. And so the silence continues not as an escape from the world, but as a deeper way of engaging with it with clarity, with discernment, with grace. A woman who focuses on herself and stays silent does not disappear. She becomes more visible than ever, not in noise, but in essence, and the world cannot help but rearrange around her. A woman who learns to master her emotions is not just in control, she is free. Free from the chains of overreaction, free from the cycles of regret, and free from the grip of patterns that once dictated her responses. Emotional sovereignty is not about being unfailing. It's about not being owned by every passing feeling. It's knowing that you can feel deeply and still respond wisely. You can be hurt and still act from alignment. You can feel love, grief, anger, confusion, and still remain grounded in your values. Many people believe emotions are either something to be expressed impulsively or something to be suppressed entirely. But both extremes lead to inner imbalance. One makes you a slave to your reactions. The other disconnects you from yourself. True emotional power lies in the space between impulse and stillness. It is the cultivated ability to feel everything and yet not be consumed by anything. There is a teaching from ancient Eastern traditions that says control your breath and you control your life. Indeed, modern neuroscience agrees. When a woman pauses and breathes consciously before responding to provocation, her brain shifts from the amygdala, where emotional reactivity is born, to the prefrontal cortex, where logic, reflection, and wisdom reside. This is not just spiritual advice. It is biological reality. Consider the story of Elia, a woman who for years was known for her fire. When someone crossed the line, she met them with intensity. Her voice rose, her heart raced. She fought back with words, proving her intelligence, her sharpness, her refusal to be disrespected. But each time, even when she won the argument, she walked away feeling drained. She realized that her reactions, while justified, were costing her more than the original offense: her peace, her power, her clarity. One day, during a tense conversation with a colleague who had undermined her work in a meeting, she felt the familiar heat rising. The urge to respond immediately, to defend, to correct, but something in her shifted. She inhaled slowly, and instead of reacting, she simply paused, looked at him, said nothing. That pause, just a few seconds, wasn't empty. It was full of restraint, full of grounded energy, full of quiet power. In that pause, she realized something. The need to prove yourself is often born from the fear of being unseen. But when you know your worth, you no longer perform it for others. You hold it quietly, and the world learns to feel it without being told. The pause gave her time to assess, was this worth her emotional investment? Did this person truly have the power to define her value? No, she answered him with calm. Clear boundaries, not from fire, but from foundation. And the result, he backed down. Not because she was aggressive, but because she was anchored. She had stepped into emotional sovereignty. To be emotionally sovereign means your inner state is no longer at the mercy of other people's moods, decisions, or expectations. You stop outsourcing your peace. You stop being available to every emotional tug of war. You don't become cold, you become clear, and this clarity protects you from the trap of reaction. Every time you react without reflection, you give your power away. You let someone else set the rhythm of your nervous system. But when you pause, when you breathe, when you choose instead of react, you reclaim authorship over your inner world. This is especially vital in intimate relationships where emotional triggers are most deeply rooted. Partners often mirror each other's wounds. One's insecurity feeds the other's defensiveness. One's silence triggers the other's abandonment. One's need for control collides with the other's need for freedom. Without emotional sovereignty, these dynamics spiral into conflict, misunderstanding, and resentment. But with awareness, they become portals for growth. Sophia, a woman in her late 30s, once described how every argument with her partner would end in her crying, shouting, or walking away in anger. She felt unheard, invalidated, emotionally exhausted. But as she began a daily practice of breath work and emotional journaling, something changed. The next time conflict arose, she noticed her body first. the tightening in her chest, the clenching of her jaw, the quickening of her breath. Instead of reacting, she said, "Give me a moment." She stepped away, not to retreat, but to return to herself. She sat, she breathed, she asked herself not just what she felt, but why she felt it. Was it about him or something deeper? And then when she returned, she spoke not from the storm, but from the center of it. The conversation that followed was the first they'd had in months that didn't end in emotional chaos. It wasn't perfect, but it was present. Emotional sovereignty is not achieved by force. It is practiced through daily attention, through the habit of awareness, through the discipline of self-honesty. It is cultivated in quiet moments when no one is watching, where you choose to observe rather than indulge the narrative. You choose to breathe instead of blame, to inquire instead of accuse. And this kind of presence doesn't just benefit your relationships with others. It deepens your relationship with yourself. You begin to trust yourself more. You stop second-guessing every decision. You no longer need to crowdsource your worth or use someone's love as proof of your value. You begin to carry yourself with a quiet assurance, one that says, "I know who I am, I know what I feel, and I will no longer abandon myself for comfort or approval." This leads naturally into another kind of transformation, the power of embodied stillness. Not only does a woman's emotional mastery radiate through her words or lack of them, but it speaks even more loudly through her presence, through how she moves, how she sits, how she breathes, how she listens, and most importantly, how she holds herself when no one else is holding her. The body is not just a vessel, it is a language. It tells others how to treat you before you speak. Posture, tone, eye contact. These are not just social cues, they are energetic signatures. They communicate whether you are grounded or scattered, open or guarded, calm or reactive. When a woman walks into a room with presence, she does not have to announce her strength. It is felt. It is not the presence that demands attention. It is the presence that holds attention. This doesn't come from performing confidence. It comes from cultivating inner alignment. Imagine Maya, a soft-spoken woman who was often overlooked at work meetings. Her ideas were good, but she presented them hesitantly, eyes down, voice low, shoulders slightly hunched. She didn't realize her body was communicating doubt even when her words were clear. After attending a somatic awareness workshop, she began to practice a new habit each morning, standing barefoot for 5 minutes, breathing deeply, rolling her shoulders back, grounding her feet into the earth. Over weeks, something shifted. She wasn't trying to be someone else. She was returning to herself, inhabiting her body fully. Her voice became steadier. Her presence expanded. The next time she spoke in a meeting, people listened. Not because she shouted, but because she spoke from her center and her body confirmed her words said, "I believe in what I'm saying." And so others believed her too. This is the unseen power of embodied stillness. You don't have to yell to be heard. You don't have to push to be taken seriously. You have to be aligned internally and externally. Breathwork, posture, stillness. These are not just wellness trends. They are foundational practices for women who want to move through life with clarity and respect. The breath especially is a tool often overlooked. It is the bridge between mind and body, between thought and action, between reaction and response. In moments of emotional intensity, one deep intentional breath can change the entire trajectory of a conversation. The practice of conscious breathing rewires the body's stress response. It tells your nervous system, "I am safe, I am here, I can respond with wisdom." Over time, this rewiring becomes your default. You are no longer pulled by the chaos outside you. You move from center, and that center becomes your compass, especially when others try to pull you into storms you didn't create. Embodied stillness also teaches you patience. In a world of urgency, a woman who moves slowly, who responds after reflection, who doesn't rush to fix or explain, becomes a mystery. Not because she hides herself, but because she reveals only what is aligned. Her yes is clear, her no is unwavering, her time is sacred. This kind of presence doesn't push away others. It invites truth. It creates a relational field where only authenticity can survive. People can feel when you are present, not just physically, but energetically. They feel safer around you, not because you cater to them, but because you are not at war with yourself. And this in turn creates emotional safety in relationships. When your presence is grounded, your partner no longer feels the pressure to guess your mood, manage your triggers, or decode your reactions. You create a space of emotional predictability, not by being passive, but by being internally consistent. Children too sense this. A mother who is emotionally sovereign and embodied teaches not by her words, but by her way of being. She models what it means to be present in discomfort, to pause in conflict, to breathe through overwhelm. And that example becomes an inheritance more valuable than any advice. To live in this way requires intention. It is not automatic, it must be cultivated, but the reward is immeasurable. Your relationships evolve, your decisions clarify, your energy deepens, you become a quiet force. Not for domination, but for peace, not for attention, but for alignment. Not to prove, but to be. And in that being, others are moved not by what you do, but by who you are. Because you are no longer just reacting to life, you are responding to it from a place of inner truth. And that truth becomes the most powerful thing in the room. Every woman carries within her a rhythm, an energy, a signal that precedes her words and even her actions. Before she speaks, before she responds, even before she enters the room, there is a kind of transmission that takes place. It is subtle, but it is unmistakable. It is her emotional frequency. And the truth is, people don't just hear what you say, they feel who you are. The mirror effect teaches us that relationships are reflections. What we carry inside, we end up projecting out. What we avoid internally often manifests externally in the people we attract or repel, in the conflicts we repeat, in the silence we endure, and even in the love we accept. When there is inner disorder, chaos seems to find us no matter how much we run from it. But when there is inner peace, things around us begin to quiet down. Not because the world changes, but because our relationship with it transforms. Imagine a woman who carries unresolved grief in her heart. She may look composed, even smile in public, but something in her frequency speaks of heaviness. Without realizing it, she attracts partners who are emotionally unavailable, mirroring back her own disconnect. Or think of a woman filled with self-doubt. She may speak words of affirmation, but her energy subtly communicates hesitation. And so she finds herself in dynamics where her boundaries are tested, her voice is overlooked, her confidence is questioned. This is not to blame but to awaken. The mirror effect is not punishment, it is revelation. Life keeps showing us through others what we still need to address within. When you begin to center yourself in truth, not performance, not fear, but truth, everything around you becomes clearer, not easier but clearer. A woman once shared how she kept ending up in relationships where she felt used. Every man she dated seemed charming at first, but would later become cold, controlling or indifferent. At first she blamed them, then she blamed herself. But after deep reflection, she realized she was operating from a subconscious belief that her worth was transactional. That love had to be earned through effort. She was overgiving, over-explaining and overextending herself in hopes of receiving scraps of affection. Her energy was saying, please see me, even when her words said I'm fine. When she stopped trying to fix others and turned inward, things changed. She began to sit in silence more often, to listen to her own breath, to observe her emotional patterns. She didn't try to be liked, she tried to be honest. She didn't rush into intimacy. She watched people slowly, and she realized something profound. When she became emotionally consistent with herself, people could no longer manipulate her. She stopped attracting chaos. Her stillness began to act as a filter. The mirror effect doesn't just reveal what is broken, it reveals what is possible. When your internal world is ordered, aligned, and nourished, your relationships become reflections of that harmony. It's not magic, it's resonance. We draw people into our lives who vibrate at a similar emotional level. And as we raise our own frequency, not by pretending, but by healing, our environment begins to shift. People begin to respect your silence because they can feel it's not empty, it's intentional. They feel your no before you even say it. They feel your joy not because you display it, but because it lives in you. You begin to understand that being centered is the greatest protection you can ever have. It shields you not with walls but with presence. This is why inner work is not a luxury. It is the foundation. The woman who invests in her internal world, the one who examines her stories, clears her energy, and returns to herself again and again, builds a life that reflects peace. She no longer begs for connection. She becomes connection. She no longer performs for love. She embodies love. And from that embodiment, she attracts those who are ready to meet her. Not just in romance, but in friendship, in family, in community. This inner alignment requires discipline. It means choosing to pause before reacting. It means walking away from what disrupts your peace, even if it's familiar. It means being willing to feel uncomfortable truths rather than escape into distractions. But the reward is clarity. You begin to trust yourself more. You stop second-guessing your instincts. You no longer tolerate energy that drains you because you're lying to pretend anymore. Even in solitude, you feel connected because you're no longer seeking from outside what you now generate from within. That shift is everything. It's the difference between chasing and attracting, between noise and resonance, between being pulled in 1,000 directions and standing firmly in one. Still, life has a way of testing them. There will always be people who don't understand your silence, who feel threatened by your presence, who try to pull you back into old patterns. And in those moments, you are faced with a choicy contract to make others comfortable or expand to remain true. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is to pull back not in resentment, but in realignment. This is what we call strategic withdrawal. It is the conscious decision to step back to observe and to allow the truth to reveal itself not through confrontation, but through distance. There's a saying, when you stop speaking, people reveal who they are. It's not just a poetic idea, it's a psychological reality. When you stop feeding a dynamic, you expose its core. When you stop explaining yourself, you discover who truly seeks to understand. When you stop initiating, you find out who values connection enough to reach for you. Distance has a language and silence has its own kind of clarity. Strategic withdrawal is not about ghosting or playing games. It is about reclaiming your emotional energy from places where it is being wasted. It is about giving yourself space to see things as they are, not as you wish them to be. Often we stay too long in situations because we are addicted to potential. We see what someone's could be and we ignore what they are. Potential is not a promise. And silence allows us to stop projecting and start perceiving. Amira, a woman who had been in an on-again, off-again relationship for years, finally chose silence not out of bitterness but out of wisdom. She had tried everything. Talks, letters, counseling, compromise, but the cycle continued. Each time she explained her needs, they were acknowledged but never respected. So one day she stopped explaining. She didn't threaten, she didn't argue, she just became quiet. That silence became her boundary, and in that space she could finally hear her own voice. Not the anxious voice that said, make it work, but the deeper voice that said, let it go. Within weeks, the truth of the relationship became undeniable. Not because he changed, but because she did. And from that clarity, she found peace. Withdrawal is not weakness, it is wisdom. It allows energy to recalibrate. It reveals willing to meet you where you are. It filters out the noise so you can hear your intuition. And perhaps most importantly, it teaches you that you are not responsible for carrying relationships alone. A woman who knows when to withdraw is a woman who knows her worth. She is not afraid of being alone because she is not lonely in herself. She doesn't fear silence because silence is where she hears her truth most clearly. She doesn't chase answers because she knows the right questions will always bring the answers in time. There's a powerful shift that happens when you stop trying to force outcomes. You begin to trust the unfolding. You begin to notice how much energy you used to waste trying to make others see, make them care, make them stay. And in letting go, you reclaim all that energy for your own growth, for your own healing, for your own joy. Some people will call this selfish. Let them, because they've never tasted the kind of self-respect that comes from refusing to betray yourself. Others may call you distant, but what they're really feeling is your energetic boundary, the space you now protect, like sacred ground. When you withdraw, not as punishment but as protection, you allow space for clarity to breathe. And clarity is what guides wise action. It tells you when to stay, when to go, when to speak, and when to let silence do the talking. It teaches you that your presence is not something to offer lightly. It is a gift, a sacred force, and it must be given where it is valued. The woman who practices strategic withdrawal becomes magnetic, not because she's mysterious, but because she's whole. People are drawn to her stillness, her integrity, her strength, but not everyone will be ready for it. And that's okay, because she no longer lives to be understood by everyone. She lives to be true to herself. And from that truth, everything else begins to align. Not always immediately, not always without challenge, but always with purpose. Because life supports those who walk in alignment. It clears paths for the woman who is brave enough to walk alone when needed and wise enough to know when to return. This is the silent wisdom that speaks louder than noise, the quiet presence that echoes louder than performance, and the calm that once chosen never truly leaves you again. When a woman chooses to focus on herself and embraces silence, not as absence but as intention, her life begins to shift in profound ways. Not because she forces change, but because she becomes change. She no longer reacts from old wounds, but responds from inner wisdom. She doesn't beg to be heard. Her stillness speaks for her. She no longer pours into what depletes her. She reserves her energy for what aligns with her growth, her peace, and her truth. This journey is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is quiet, steady, and powerful. She learns to see beyond appearances, to feel the energy behind words, and to walk away from noise disguised as love. Her presence becomes her statement. Her boundaries become her protection. Her silence becomes her filter. And slowly, the world around her begins to mirror the world within her. Relationships become more respectful. Opportunities arise without chasing. Clarity replaces confusion. Not because she fixed everything around her, but because she mastered what was within. The woman who learns to be still, to be present, to be centered in her own truth, she is no longer available for anything less than what she deserves. In her silence, everything unnecessary falls away. And in that space, everything meaningful finds its way home. Clarity replaces confusion, not because every problem has been solved or every circumstance has been neatly arranged, but because she has learned to master what lies within. Life will never be free of chaos, unpredictability, or noise. The world outside of us is constantly shifting, demanding, pulling us in 100 directions. But clarity is not born from control over the external. It is born from sovereignty over the internal. When a woman learns to anchor herself in stillness, she no longer needs the world to bend in her favor in order to feel whole. She discovers that her peace is not dependent on conditions but on choice. The woman who learns to be still is not passive. Her stillness is power, not weakness. To be still is to resist the urge to be swept away by every passing storm. It is to pause long enough to hear the deeper voice beneath the noise, the voice of truth that has always lived within her. In that quiet, she finds her center, and from that center she moves with purpose. She no longer reacts to life impulsively. She responds with wisdom. She no longer chases what does not belong to her. She allows what is meant to find her. Presence becomes her gift. To be fully here in her body, in her breath, in this moment, is to reclaim herself from the distractions that once fractured her spirit. She no longer abandons herself to please others, to chase validation, or to fear being misunderstood. She learns that being present is not simply a mindfulness practice, but a radical act of self-respect. In presence, she realizes that her worth does not come from doing more, fixing more, or being more. Her worth was always here, and now she lives in a way that reflects it. And when a woman becomes centered in her truth, she becomes unavailable for anything less than what she deserves. This does not mean she is hardened or closed. Rather, she is clear. She no longer entertains half-hearted love, empty promises, or relationships that ask her to shrink. She no longer wastes her energy trying to prove her value to those who cannot see. Instead, she moves differently, calmer, but stronger. She holds boundaries with grace. She speaks with conviction. She chooses from alignment rather than fear. In her silence, all that is unnecessary falls away. The noise, the drama, the striving, the doubts, they lose their grip on her because she has stopped feeding them. Silence becomes her filter, revealing what is real and what is merely distraction. What remains is what matters, peace, purpose, and the relationships and opportunities that honor her growth. And it is in this spaciousness that everything meaningful finds its way home. Love, but the kind that uplifts. Work, but the kind that fulfills. Connections, but the kind that nourish. She no longer has to chase. She no longer has to strive. She becomes a magnet for what aligns with her essence, because she is finally living in harmony with herself. Clarity, then, is not about fixing the world. It is about mastering the self. And once she has done that, the world around her begins to transform simply because she has.